Good morning, good afternoon, and maybe good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this learning exchange organized by the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. Today, we're going to talk about child participation in the development of a national action plan. We'll have national examples. We will discuss it, and then we'll have an interactive session today. This is part of a series of learning exchanges that we've been organizing. The next session will be on evaluating a national action plan. And so we're going to discuss it today together for about an hour. The reason why we have to discuss child participation in the development of national action plan, in fact, development of a policy or even legislation, is because it's an important subject. It's recognized by the UN Convention on the Right of the Child and other regional treaties and conventions as well. And it's because children have the right to be consulted when adults take decisions that concern them, so they have to be involved. In such case, we need to have precise guidelines to ensure their safety also. And because it's an issue that this participation of children has to be meaningful, it has to be safe, it has to be ethical. So we need to learn how to do it. We need to share experience and learning. So that's why we have two participants from the Philippines, and we have another experience from Uganda. So we may start with the Philippines, and after that we'll move on to Uganda. And I will start by presenting our colleagues from Uganda, from the Philippines. What's going to happen, we'll have about maybe a 10-minute presentation, and then after that we open to discussion between us. So you have the chat box, you could always forward your questions, and then we'll find a way to answer as much as possible. So our first speaker will be Mr. Alan Nunez. Thank you, Alan, for joining us. He's an advocacy specialist at Child Fund Philippines. He has an extensive background in child rights issues. He has developed a lot of training and conferences in the Philippines. He's also specialized in research, advocacy, and project development in child rights. So Alan will talk to us about the experience of child participation in the development of policies, national action plans in the Philippines. So we have a presentation, and then I leave the floor to Alan. Thank you, Alan. Go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening from the Philippines. As Sonia said, my name is Alan. I'm the advocacy specialist at Child Fund Philippines. And Child Fund Philippines is currently the convener of the Civil Society Coalition on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, popularly known here in our country as the CRC Coalition. I will be sharing the Philippine experience on child participation in coming up with a national plan of action. I apologize, my video camera is broken, so I cannot turn it on. But I have also some of my colleagues in the Philippines who can also help me answering some of the questions later on. This is actually a collective effort of presenting with the Pat here, and thank you for the opportunity. Before I proceed, let me introduce first the CRC Coalition. It is an alliance of 24 local and international child-focused organizations working together to promote children's rights in the Philippines. We have been submitting periodic reports to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child since 1994 and actively participated in other human rights reports such as the Universal Periodic Review. We commit to lead the civil society efforts towards strengthening government accountability for children's rights through systematic monitoring of the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Within the CRC Coalition, there are several working groups, and we have solid technical working groups with different functions, and the child protection working group's primary role is to ensure minimum standards and principles are adhered to when engaging with and for children. We put child participation as one of the four broad rights of children at the center of our work processes. As a result, CRC Coalition as an institution has been given low risk rating in our prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse accreditation last year. Through this, the coalition's child participation toolkit has been further improved as in a and is now compliant with the child safeguarding and PSEA protocols. Let me also give you some background of the child participation situation in the Philippines. First, the Youth Council, so we call it Sangguniang Kabataan. Although many initiatives have been undertaken by both the government and NGOs to ensure meaningful child participation, a study by the Department of Interior and Local Government and UNICEF found that although these youth councils had tremendous potential to develop the next generation of leaders, engage youth in the community and teach them accountability, honesty, and creativity, however, their performance over the past 10 years have been generally weak. In addition, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, in their concluding observations to the Republic of the Philippines' third and fourth periodic reports in 2009, raised concerns about the ability of children, especially those belonging to minority and indigenous populations, to be heard within the family, schools, institutions, the courts, and administrative bodies. And a further study conducted by the Council for the Welfare of Children and the National Committee on Child and Youth Participation in 2009 found that child participation had a positive effect, that participation had created changes in the level of awareness children had of their rights, and had also had positive impact on parents, teachers, and community leaders. However, the study also found that although the national framework on child and youth participation was a good document, it was not well known, and its circulation was limited. In addition, the framework on its own was inefficient to guide the institutions and agencies to effectively engage children and young people. Further, child participation in formal bodies did not make adequate allowance for children's stage of development and was not child-friendly, restricting the extent to which participation was effective, and in some cases, making it tokenistic. And finally, those working with children at all levels also had an incomplete understanding of the concept, principles, and practice of child and youth participation, having received little training or without access to appropriate training materials or guidance. And these are some of the direct quotes from children. According to children, when we ask them about their rights, how are they enjoying the rights of participation? One said that regarding their participation in local council for the protection of children, they are being listened to. They listen to us, but they do not implement our suggestions. And then for the SK, for the Youth Council, we are not being approached or consulted. And some said that we are not aware that there is a budget for us. And when the pandemic actually started last year, and we switched to virtual meetings and virtual ways of engaging children, and they told us that not everyone can access internet easily. Others have to go up the mountains to get a good internet connection. So what are we doing? We've actually come up with the government through the Council of the Welfare of Children come up with a guidebook on child participation in the Philippines. This was actually in 2014. And the CRC Coalition actually supplemented that with a child participation toolkit. This actually aims to help those who are engaging children to be so that whenever they engage children, it will ensure that the participation is meaningful, safe, and ethical. And also we have like the CRC Coalition as a counterpart with children. There's an initiative called Children Talk to Children about the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, or C2C. It's a child-led joint initiative that also monitors the implementation of children's rights in the Philippines. Recently, they've actually launched their children's independent report, and they also submitted their independent report to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. So what's the process? So let me go to the process now of coming up with the National Plan of Action. The CSOs like us, CRC Coalition, actively participate in the government's process to come up with the National Plan of Action for Children. And it's actually being led by the Council for the Welfare of Children, or CWC. CWC provides a venue for duty bearers, stakeholders, including children, to participate in the process. And what CWC also do is they provide a separate venue and opportunity for children. Example, parallel consultation. They use a different approach in engaging children. This is a process that complies with the guidelines set in the child participation guideline I shared with you a while ago. And we also use the child protection toolkit with consideration to children's evolving capacities. The results of the consultations then, including that from the children, form part of the overall National Plan of Action for Children. And the big thing actually, this was like 3 years ago. We've come up with a Philippine Plan of Action to end violence against children. We call it PPA-EVAC. This concurs the findings of the National Baseline Study on Violence Against Children that was conducted in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a study commissioned through the efforts of the Council for the Welfare of Children and the National Steering Committee on the National Baseline Study on Violence Against Children, or the NSC on NBS back. And then after the Philippine Plan of Action to end violence against children was launched, it also resulted in the forming of a national network to end violence against children, where CRC Coalition is the co-chair and the Council for the Welfare of the Children is currently the chair. And this is the participation of children during those processes. They've been consulted during the national baseline study. They are primarily the participants of the study, and then the result of study was validated with them, and they even we even provided them with a venue and opportunity to when Council for the Welfare of Children drafted the Philippine Plan of Action to End Violence Against Children, it was presented to them, and they come up with a call to action. What they wanted to tell us about the PPA EVAC, and during the launch, they presented their manifesto. And this is actually one of the impact of that particular presentation of children during the launch. It was captured by the media, and it resulted in some of the lawmakers, because during that time there are moves by there were moves by some policymakers to lower the minimum age of criminal responsibility, but then the children in their manifesto explicitly say that they do not. They are calling us to not lower the minimum age of criminal responsibility, and it was captured by the media that time, and it resulted in some of the lawmakers to reconsider their stand against against lowering the age of minimum or criminal responsibility, minimum age of criminal responsibility. So, and then these are some of the challenges. according to children, they describe the participation in local government planning as merely token. They still would describe it as like token participation, because uh, although there are already like great initiatives being done at the national level, it is not yet being cascaded to the local levels in terms of um, knowledge. The child participation guideline and the toolkit needs to be popularized at the local levels. And then what we also see is that we need to come up with a knowledge management system. It should be in place, especially at the local levels, to ensure continuing capacity building of duty bearers on child participation. And we also see that we need to further strengthen our advocacy on child participation and continuously guide the local government units. And that's actually is my presentation. I hope I did not go over the 10 minutes, but I have my colleagues here in the Philippines who can also help answer some of your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alan, for this very interesting experience of the CRC Coalition in the Philippines in terms of child participation. It's very interesting to see that a guideline and toolkit has been developed on child participation that could be used as an example for in other countries. And then also the fact that the National Action Plan, children have been consulted and participated in the development of the National Action Plan 2017-2022, and that they have a manifesto. However, we note that we still have some challenges, and it's good actually to have identified the challenges so that there could be effort to try and address them. So thank you so much. We hope we'll have a very interesting question as well, and then we'll have some discussion around it. Thank you, Alan. So our next speaker will be Timothy Opobo from AfriChild Center in Uganda. Timothy is the executive director of AfriChild Center. He's based in, based at Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. Well, Timothy is a long-standing child rights activist, and the AfriChild itself is a center of training and research which contribute to the knowledge and the skill development in terms of the well-being of the African child. So Timothy is going to share with us the experience of Uganda in terms of child participation in the development of policies and national action plan. So Timothy, open the floor, and then over to you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I just want to confirm, should I run the slides from my end, or will they run from your end?
From your end, if you can.
That's okay, thank you. Are you able to see the slides? Could you kindly confirm?
We can see it. If you can make it bigger so we can have the full screen. Yes, thank you. That's perfect.
Okay. So thank you very much, Sonia. And it's a privilege and an honor to have an opportunity to share our experience from Uganda. As Sonia introduced, my name is Timothy Opobo, and I work with the AfriChild Center out of Makerere University in Uganda. So I'm going to share, just as Alan did, a bit of our experience in promoting child participation in the work that we do, and how it has actually had tangible results in delivering policy and legislation in the country. Just by way of introduction, very quickly, the AfriChild Center is a multidisciplinary research center. Our intention and objective is to convene research, policy, and practice. What we do in the work that, what we aim at in the work that we're doing is to generate evidence to be able to inform both policy and practice. And so we convene practitioners, we convene academicians, and we also convene policymakers, and that explains really who we are in a nutshell. So child participation in Uganda, I like to start by mentioning that as a country, there are a few enablers or building blocks that have allowed us to actually have children involved meaningfully in promoting the cause of children and particularly addressing the issue of violence against children. As a country, we are fortunate to have a conducive policy and legislative environment that is promotive of child participation. We also have existing spaces and platforms that children can take advantage of to express themselves and express their views right from community level all the way to the national level, where I gave an example of a parliamentary forum for children, where children are able to directly engage with legislators and share their views and opinions. Just as Alan mentioned, in the Philippines, we are also privileged to have a national child participation guide or guidelines on child participation. These were developed under the coalition of the Uganda Child Rights NGO network in collaboration with the government of Uganda. And this has been a tool that we as actors used as a point of reference to guide our engagement with children. And so that has been very helpful. But finally, I think there has also been deliberate effort by actors, including ourselves, to ensure that in the work that we are doing, the voices of children are magnified, the voices of children are taken into account. And so we have made an effort to ensure that this is done. And so I'm going to share 3 examples just to demonstrate this, and I hope I'll be able to keep time. These are the National Child Participation Guidelines that we have. I mentioned this, and they were developed under the coalition of the Uganda Child Rights NGO network and the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, which is our parent ministry in Uganda. So one of the key things as a research institution that we have labored to do is to deliberately have the voices of children articulated in our research. And as a research institution, I want to share with you just one particular element and research that directly included children, not just as subjects of research, but actually as co-designers and active participants in the research. So as you're all aware of the national studies on violence against children across the countries, in the case of Uganda, we did the National Violence Against Children Survey that is mainly quantitative. And AfriChild was at the forefront of leading the implementation of that study in collaboration with UNICEF and other partners. We, however, went ahead to do a qualitative study to try to address the gaps that were in the National Violence Against Children study. And we were looking at a category of children that is not covered by the VAC survey. And these are children outside family care. And specifically, we looked at domestic workers, we looked at sexually exploited children, we looked at children on the street in that age bracket. And the approach we took was to actually have a participatory action approach that actually opens spaces for youth and children to actually be the architects of this research and not just simply subjects of the research, as I mentioned. This study complemented the National Violence Against Children survey. And what is very important is that the voices, the children were actually directly involved in collecting the information in this research. We were able to use the information by children themselves, the voices of children, to draft the final report. The Uganda report is a little unique to other country reports because both the study and the National Action Plan are embedded in one report. And the voices of children from this particular research informed that National Action Plan. And so that is just one example of how we've been able to influence or have children's voices articulated in the National Action Plan. So the other example has been working with our partners and doing direct advocacy to actually make sure that we bring the voices of children to the forefront of the engagements with some of the decision makers. One other example was a consultation we had with street connected children. And we had a challenge because most of these children are in the center of the streets in Kampala, which is the capital city of Uganda. And we wanted to make sure that the authorities have a chance to engage and hear what the feelings of the children on the street were. And working through the Uganda Child Rights NGO network, we were able to have a consultative process and children working on the streets because there was this tension and many times clash between the children and the city authorities. The children were able to share very candidly their experience being on the street, their challenges on the street, and the outcome of these consultations was that the authority was able to actually put in place an ordinance, which is a local law within the city authority, to actually address the concerns that were raised by the children. But beyond this is that, we had been for 13 years pushing for an amendment in the National Children's Act. And these voices of these children actually supported the amendment of the Children's Act in 2016. And for us as partners working in the area of children, this was a huge success. And it was an evidence that indeed meaningful participation of children can actually lead to influence policy and legislation. We also worked with children and were able to have national stakeholders dialogues. And one of the target audiences was to have the children actually engage with the highest levels of decision making in Uganda. And we wanted to make sure we target the leadership of this country, the executive. And we were able to work with other partners to organize a child delegate stakeholder engagement in 2016 that we brought children to actually speak to the First Lady of the country of Uganda, so that they were able to, for themselves, tell her some of the challenges they were facing, particularly as related to the violence in their communities and in the schools. We found this to be extremely helpful and extremely powerful because following this meeting with the First Lady of Uganda, we were able to have the Children's Act that I mentioned previously amended. It was, I think, at this point that we were able to reach the tipping point, because although for 13 years we had tried to get it amended to address issues like corporal punishment, to address issues to do with inter-country adoption, we had not been successful. And until we brought these children to share their own experiences is when the executive actually saw sense and listened and actually took action. Finally, I want to share with you another successful engagement we had, which was an interaction between legislators and children, the legislators being the members of parliament of this country. It was, I think, one of the most powerful sessions that I have been involved and engaged with, because we had been going to the members of parliament continuously, trying to get them to prioritize the issues of ending violence against children in Uganda. But we were not making headway. And when we were able to have children come and speak to the Speaker of Parliament, who you see up on your left, from my end, it's on the left.
Recording in progress.
Right, from where you are, that these children shared really heartbreaking experiences. And this actually caused the members and legislators to have a special session, which was had never happened in the history of the Parliament of Uganda, a special session to discuss violence against children in Uganda. And the outcome of this actually was that a motion was moved urging the government to make ending violence against children a national priority by the members. And this motion was seconded. We also had a motion to expedite the implementation of all child-related policies and laws, a motion on sexual violence against girls, and a motion seeking leave to introduce a private member's bill on child sacrifice. And I'm happy to say that this has actually been passed as law in Uganda as of the end of last year. So I think this speaks very powerfully to what the voices of children and meaningful participation of children can do to influence policy and laws in a given country. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timothy, for this very brilliant presentation about the Ugandan experience of child participation in influencing the policies and legislation as well. I mean, the national frameworks in Uganda. We can note some key points, for example, the participation of children in studies, which then were informed the National Action Plan. So it's we can see the clear link between child participation and the national development of the National Action Plan, and also the consultation of children, connected street children, and then the subsequent adoption of an ordinance, and then also the amendment of the Children's Act in Uganda. So we can see the link between child participation and the legislation, amendment of legislation, and also the Children's Delegates Initiative interaction with the dialogue with stakeholders, and then the first ladies and so on. So high level interaction between children and stakeholders in Uganda, and the interaction with legislators as well. And then the fact that actually the legislators decided to prioritize children's issues. So that's important, and then that cannot be neglected and can only be saluted. Good initiative in the Philippines and Uganda. So now we're opening the floor to our participants. We're waiting for questions. I'm checking the chat box and I can't see any question, but I'm sure they're just reflecting, and a question will be coming soon. We will be overwhelmed, I'm sure. But in the meantime, I do have a question. I think I have a question for Timothy. How do you ensure child safeguarding in their participation? Because this is very important. There's child participation and there's also child protection. What are the measures? I'm sure you have a guide. You both mentioned a guideline and then toolkit, etc. So I'm sure you have provision for that. It's not only a question for Timothy, actually. We'll hear from Timothy, but also we'll hear from Alan. So maybe we'll start with Timothy. Thank you. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Sonia. And I think that is a very pertinent question, the issue of child safeguarding. As an institution that is very deliberate in working with children in our research, we prioritize child safeguarding. And as I mentioned, we do have child participation guidelines that actually provide guidance on the do's and the don'ts. But what I think is very important in our particular case is that we, first of all, ensure that there's ethical interaction with children, and nothing is actually hidden in terms of the objectives of what we're doing. But beyond that, also making sure that we get consent, not just from the parents and guardians, but in the case of street children, from the children themselves, and get their willingness to participate. We have gone as far as ensuring that all those that interact with children actually sign our child safeguarding policy as an organization. And whoever is engaging with these children has to undergo a background check to ensure that we are not putting these children at risk beyond what they're already going through. So we really try to make sure that we kind of kind of tick all the dots and ensure that the safety of these children is placed first beyond anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. Maybe Alan wants to say something about safeguarding children?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and maybe my colleagues in the Philippines can also add. But the very important aspect to ensure that we are compliant with child safeguarding is during the planning process. We of course, I've already mentioned that we already have the child protection guideline and the toolkit, and there are actually processes in place there to guide institutions, organizations whenever they need to engage children. Aside from making sure that the participation is meaningful, it should be safe and ethical as well. And during the planning process, for example, we need to conduct risk assessment and come up with risk mitigation measures that will ensure that children are safe during the process and the risks are identified and mitigated. And then we also need to make sure that the children knows what they are participating in. We need to we have like a consent form, and the consent form usually we need to ensure that children knows what they are into, and you know, they are aware of what is expected of them, and if they are okay with the engagement. And of course, we need to also consider that their participation will not violate any other aspects of their rights, that it will not actually hamper them from continuing or their studies, or it will not let them leave from their schools, and so on. So there are a lot of aspects. That's why it's really it's a tedious process, but we need to make sure that everything is in order. That's why in the Philippines, usually most of the child protection, we usually engage children during the time that they are in summer vacation, or they are not into schools, or they are, you know, they are in vacation from studies and so on, because that's that time that it's ethical and it's for their good or benefit as well. Maybe my colleagues in the Philippines could also add, but that's actually what I observed in the whenever we had child participation processes here in the country, in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you. So no colleagues from the Philippines wants to add now, or maybe later. I have another question. I have another question for, oh, Alan, you wanted to say something?
No, sorry.
Okay. I have another question, actually. It's more about ensuring equal participation of children, being inclusive, including children who may not be speaking the national language, who may not be speaking English. Sometimes those draft laws and national action plans are written in English or the national language. How do we ensure that children who do not speak English or the national language, how do we ensure that they are consulted and then they have a meaningful input into and participation into those documents? What are your experience in the Philippines and in Uganda in this area? We can start with Timothy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sonia. The wonderful question, inclusive participation. I think one is that we, first of all, are very deliberate to make sure that we catering for what we would consider the most affected or the most vulnerable. And so we try to ensure that, for example, children with the special needs are taken care of. We try to ensure that both genders of children are represented in these engagements. But more specifically to the question you asked, children who are not able to express themselves in English. One of the things we did in all these engagements, I must say most of the children you saw in the pictures I shared, are not able to speak English. And we allow the children, first of all, to express themselves in the local language. And in the case of, depending on where we are, there are places where everybody is conversant with the local language. And so that is the language of discussion. It also puts the children at ease in terms of expressing themselves. But in the event, for example, where we had the legislators, you have legislators from different parts of Uganda, and we have over 56 languages in this country. So what we did was to, first of all, allow the children to express themselves locally, but allowed for an interpreter to be able to share the views of these children verbatim for the legislators to understand. And in terms of the laws that, of course, are very drafted in very legalistic language, I think what we try to do that is very important is give feedback to the children on the issues they have raised by breaking down what has been included from their views in the law in the simplest language possible. I think one of the other things that we have learned through this work is to make sure that even when children engage, say, with delegates at different levels, that there is a feedback mechanism that we go back to say, because of the views that you expressed, this is what is in the legislation. We had to translate and simplify the Children's Amendment Act 2016 for children to understand, and we're able to distribute this, in communities and schools in local language. And that, I think, is very helpful and one of the means we use to address this. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. I don't know if Alan wants to say something about equal participation of children.
In the Philippines, actually, it's in terms of there are a lot of language and dialects also in the Philippines, and but that's actually the benefit of the partnership with government and civil society organizations. The partner CSOs are actually the one who is helping translate those into vernacular, and then that's not also only the challenge, because we also need to make it child friendly, because it's not just about the language, it's not just about the words. You need to make it more interesting to children, and we need to come up with infographics and some materials that children can relate to, and you may be surprised that actually children are the one who are actually doing we have like children champions, youth advocates. They're actually the one we will just ensure that this particular like, for example, this particular document or report is explained to them, and we are surprised that they're the one who are actually coming up with a better version or a child-friendlier version that they can communicate with their fellow children. So that's actually something what we are doing about that, and with that process, it ensures that we're not leaving any children behind. But if there are, those are the things that we still need to work out on. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Timothy. We still have questions. In fact, there's one question. Yeah,
in the chat box. Sorry, there's some questions in the chat. Yeah, okay.
That's what I was going to. Yeah, there's one question about who do you engage? How do you engage children out of school? Maybe Timothy, and then after that, Alan. Children out of school. It's true, I talked about children who may not be speaking the national language and so on, but children out of school. I know in Uganda there was a program on children in the street, but
according to my friends in from the government who are with me in the Philippines right now, they do actually cluster consultations, so island-wide. So aside from that, so when we do island-wide or cluster consultations, there will also be an opportunity for other sectors or groups of children to participate, and an opportunity to explain them. I guess I believe my colleague G. Mohika can also add to my explanation around that, I have G. Mojica here from the Council for the Welfare of Children in the Philippines. Hi, Ms. G.
Hi. This is the beauty of the partnership of the government and the CSO in the Philippines. This is where we complement each other in terms of, especially in engaging children. Most of when we do have to engage children, of course, we tap our partners from CSOs and the non-government organizations so that we would be involving children, not necessarily those only in school, but also coming from the other marginalized sector. And that would also, we make sure that it is inclusive gender wise, having children with disabilities, also children, indigenous people's children. These are our consideration. We are institutional. We have already institutionalized, and we work together, government and CSO, in terms of in coming up with policy issuances, or even the implementation, the compliance report on the UN CRC. We engage really children, and as Alan had already mentioned, it's different. It's different. Whenever we engage children, also we train child and youth facilitators who would actually be the ones conducting the workshops or the sessions with the children and young people. This is so that they would also be comfortable in terms of expressing themselves. So adults here would more or less be guiding that child or youth facilitators that were identified. And that's why Alan had mentioned that the creativity in terms of when we run the workshops or the consultation workshop or sessions, you'd already see the creativity of the children and young people, so that they would be more comfortable. That would be all.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this detailed information. I have a question in the chat box. How have you involved children in monitoring the implementation of the National Action Plan? We're talking about implementation now. Maybe we can start with Timothy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and wonderful question. I think, as I said, we really need to embrace the whole idea and concept of feedback to children. I think that's an element that we may have not been doing very well. We are able to have children express themselves in spaces, but going back to them and first of all showing what progress their participation created is important. The question in how have we involved them in particularly monitoring the National Action Plan. In the case of Uganda, I'll share this, that we actually, on an annual basis, organize an engagement for children and legislators. And I have found this to be very impactful and very powerful, because children are always able now to ask for accountability from the legislators. Each year we are tracking progress and saying, in the last year, in the National Action Plan, we committed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps. And this has actually enabled our legislators to be able to, first of all, not just make promises that are empty, because they now know that in a year's time, these children are going to be coming back to ask for how far they have gone. And I found this to be very, very powerful. In the first instant, the children were even able to mention names of specific legislators who made promises that that they would follow on, that were in the National Action Plan. And so when we went back, some of the legislators were embarrassed that they hadn't taken action. And the third time we went back, I'm happy to say that there were very specific actions that the legislators had taken, including increased budgetary allocation to specific aspects related to violence against children. I'll give you a very tangible example. One of the key issues was an issue to do with children with special needs, and particularly children that have a condition called nodding disease syndrome. It's prevalent in northern Uganda. And these children, many of them, because of this condition, suffer a lot of, yes, emotional violence, but a lot of sexual violence, particularly for the girls. And the children were able to, this was one of the issues and recommendations in the National Action Plan, that children with special needs, and particularly this condition, needed a special care and special protection. And the first time this was raised by the children themselves, we didn't have action in the next time the children went. But the third time, we were happy to note that the government had actually, and the Speaker of Parliament, the Deputy Speaker of Parliament, who's now the Speaker of Parliament, was able to stand and say, we have now been able to allocate this amount of money to ensure that the structures are in place to address this situation. So I think that the answer in one line would be accountability. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Timothy. I don't know, Alan, maybe you want to say something about implementing, consulting children for the implementation?
We there's like the Philippine National Children's Conference. It's a venue for children to assess the national plans and provide recommendations to the duty bearers. So that's what we are doing. And like what Ms. G mentioned a while ago. So the good thing about the Philippines is the civil society and the government is actually working hand in hand to achieve those. And we also have like the we ensure that the guideline, the child participation guideline, also sets specific measures to ensure that every child is every sector of children is actually or the process of child participation is inclusive. So yeah, we've gone a long way. There are a lot of areas that needs to be improved, but we're getting there. And the good thing also is we're continuously capacitating children and young people as advocates and also facilitators who also reach out to other children about the information on their rights, and encouraging other children to be engaged in fighting and advocating for their rights. Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much. In fact, while you're still speaking, Alan, I have a question for you, and it comes from your own presentation.
Mm-hmm.
The children have complained about tokenism. So my question is, how do you address this, the issue of tokenism? Because we can have children and then parade them, and then we show that we tick the box and everything. But how do we make it meaningful, and how can we avoid the fact that they feel that maybe they've been used?
Yeah, that's actually how they fell, because the national level, they've been provided with the opportunity to participate in all the processes. But when they go to the communities, they still feel that their participation is it's still a token participation according to them, because they are being listened to, but in terms of implementation or implementing their suggestions or what their recommendations, they're not being implemented. So for them, according to children, it's still being, it's still a token participation. And that particular message from children is actually what informs our next steps at the national level on how are we going to ensure that the communities, that the local government units will be trained on child participation. And also the challenge is, we know that every 6 years there's an election, there's change in leadership. We also need to make sure that there's a process of transferring the knowledge. There's a knowledge management system in place in the local governments and communities, so that if there are initiatives at the national level to educate them and train them on child participation, it will continue on. And it needs to also be there's need to be like what you call that, there should be a policy that also will allow this government to also allocate funds for children to continuously participate in the process.
Sorry, thank you, Alan. Timothy, I don't know if you have something to say about it. I see that.
I might be sounding like a broken record, but again, I said it's really ensuring that we go back to the children and share with them what progress has been made with what they have done. I think for me, that is accountability to the children. I think we have to be responsive to them. We have to make sure that they're able to see the value in their participation. And I think that's something we're really trying our best to do in the work we're doing in Uganda. Thanks.
Thank you. I see that my colleague has also shared a document about how to involve children in research and monitoring. So you can see that in the chat box. Would be a very interesting tool as well to be using. We still have we have 3 minutes. I'm sure a question can come, but that maybe I can ask a naive question that I had, just a curiosity. When it comes to technical issues like budgeting, how do you ensure child participation? Because this is technical, we're talking about big budget and so on. I don't know, Timothy, Alan, if you have anything to say about it, how do we do it? How do we do that when it's technical, or just we skip it and children are not consulted?
Well,
we need to have an idea of budget and so on.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and the question also then speaks to meaningful participation and where can children make a substantive input in the process. So in the case of budgeting, I think as is the case in most countries, definitely the children's sector is one of the most, if not most, underbudgeted sector across countries. And in our case, I think what we have not done is to get children to get into technical budgeting aspects, but what we have tried to do is to have children explain to the decision makers the why there is a need for increased budget. And then we leave the technical aspects to the technocrats, but just for them to understand why there's a need, why we as actors are calling for an increment in budget allocation to the children's sector is where we have had children meaningfully involved, so that they are able to make the case and hear from the children, why is it important for us to increase budget allocations to children or to the children's sector. I think that's the way we have done it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 30 seconds. I don't know, Alan, if you want to say something.
Okay, just a quick response to that. In the Philippines, of course, we need to educate children on the importance of increasing public investment for children, and because that will also allow them to understand the reason why some of the programs intended for them are under budget. It might be difficult for them to understand, but there's a process, and once you make the children understand the process, they later on they will actually help us lobby with governments to advocate for increased public investment on children. So that's what we are doing.
Thank you so much. Now it's the end of our session. It was very interesting, very fruitful. A big thank you to Timothy and Alan for sharing their experience, national experiences. Really, thank you. Thank you all for participating, for being there, for asking questions. We look forward to seeing you. There will be another learning exchange on the, I think, 15th of September about evaluating National Action Plan. Yes, my colleague Bess will be moderating it. So we're going to meet again very soon. Thank you for being there. A big thank you also to Sabine from WHO, strong participation. Thank you for being there, technical side of things. Bess, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat about whether it's possible to receive the presentations through email.
Yes, it will be shared. It's been recorded. The session has been recorded and the presentation. It's a shame we could have posted them on the chat box, but yeah, we'll send them out, disseminate them. Thank you so much again, and then have a nice weekend and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Have a nice weekend. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.